Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Today I'm taking you into a world of the unknown, a place shrouded in darkness, where history hides terrifying secrets. A mansion haunted not just by ghosts, but by something far worse. My name is Elias Crowley. I've been investigating paranormal cases for years. But this time, what I encountered was beyond my darkest nightmares. Doors creaking open in the dead of night, shadows lurking in mirrors, and a curse so terrifying, even priests from the Vatican trembled before it. If you have the courage, listen to this story until the end. But remember, some things are better left unknown. Are you ready? Then let's begin. My name is Elias Crowley. I've been in this profession for years, but becoming a medium was never my choice. It's either a gift or a curse. My eyes see what most people cannot, and my ears hear whispers that should not exist. However, my latest case was the most terrifying experience of my life. This time, it wasn't just about spirits and cursed entities. There were even priests from the Vatican involved. What dragged me into this chaos was a series of paranormal events in a grand mansion. In New Orleans, an old French estate, a desperate family contacted me. The mansion had turned their lives into a nightmare. Doors would open on their own. Children would hear sinister noises from the walls at midnight, and shadows appeared in mirrors where only reflections should be. Before calling me, the family had summoned priests multiple times, prayed, and performed blessings. None of it worked. The mansion held a dark secret, and I had to uncover it. That morning, I started my day early, as usual. Being a medium meant constantly dealing with dark entities and curses, but I still tried to live as normally as possible. I went to the kitchen, prepared my coffee, ate some buttered bread, and glanced at the newspaper. I thought to myself, today is going to be another extraordinary day. The warm and humid air of New Orleans was already noticeable in the early morning hours. After finishing my breakfast, I opened my laptop and checked my emails. A few messages from clients and some news from acquaintances awaited me. I drifted into deep thought. This job drained me, yet it always pulled me back in. Still, after a while I got ready, grabbed my bag, and took the essentials. My rosary, protective talisman, a pouch of salt, and a few ritual items. Then I grabbed my car keys and set off for the mansion. As I arrived at the mansion, an eerie heaviness filled the air. It felt as if unseen eyes weren't just watching the building, but the entire property. One thing caught my attention on the way people walking nearby averted their gaze the moment they noticed I was approaching the mansion. It was as if even speaking about this place was dangerous. At the door, I was greeted by the homeowner, Jonathan Harrell, and his wife, Margaret. Fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty clouded their eyes. Their daughter, Emily, stood silently, looking at me as if she knew me. Her eyes weren't normal. She was seeing something that I couldn't yet comprehend. "Can you save us?" Jonathan asked, his voice trembling. After stepping inside, we gathered in the grand living room. As Jonathan explained the events, his eyes kept darting toward the mirror behind me. Meanwhile, Emily sat in the corner, whispering something to herself, refusing to speak to anyone. That was when I realized something in this house wasn't just being heard, it was also speaking. As I walked around the living room, an old wall clock suddenly started chiming from the adjacent room. No one had touched it. The family exchanged nervous glances, while I closed my eyes and tried to sense the energy of the room. The air was dense, and an unsettling wave of dread washed over me. I decided to stay in the mansion that night. Despite all the protection circles and rituals I had prepared, something was watching me. I could feel it. It was impossible not to. After dinner, I tried to talk to Emily for a while, but she only said one thing: "It doesn't belong here, but they won't let it leave." At around 3 a.m., I was walking through the mansion's corridors. There was no wind, yet the curtains moved slightly on their own. Suddenly, all the doors in the hallway swung open at once. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tall, shadowy figure swiftly slipping into one of the rooms. I took a step forward, and the whispers began. "Leave this place. If you don't, you will die." I knew they were warning me, but leaving wasn't an option. The voices of spirits were the clearest sign that something had become active, and that meant danger. The next morning, while having breakfast, I found myself lost in thought. The Vatican had agreed to send Father Gregory and 2 priests for assistance, but even they hesitated when they heard the history of this mansion. Everyone who had left this house had either fallen ill or met a tragic fate. This wasn't an ordinary haunting. When Father Gregory finally arrived at the mansion, the first thing he said was, "There's more than just ghosts here. There is something that defies God." His words sent a chill through me. If a priest was afraid, then this was much bigger than I had anticipated. But this was only the beginning. Father Gregory and the 2 priests arrived at the mansion, carrying holy water and a few ancient scriptures. As they parked their car in front of the gate, I felt a sudden chill despite the stifling New Orleans heat. The air was heavy and tense. Emily was watching them from the window. I didn't know what these men meant to her, but there was sadness in her eyes. I woke up early that morning and prepared my breakfast. No matter how terrifying the situation was, at some point a person clings to routine to maintain sanity. As I took a sip of my coffee, I saw Father Gregory walking through the garden, praying. The other priests were preparing their materials to bless the house. Jonathan and Margaret sat at the breakfast table in silence. Emily hadn't touched her food. She stared blankly at her plate. "Did you sleep?" I asked her. She didn't respond for a while. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "It won't let me leave." A chill ran down my spine. "Who won't let you leave, Emily?" She locked eyes with me. "I don't know its name, but it speaks to me in the dark." Along with the priests, we began examining the oldest parts of the mansion. In one of the rooms, Father Gregory discovered the records of an old priest. These documents, dating back to the 18th century, revealed that the mansion had once been used for secret rituals. Church officials had visited after receiving unusual reports about the owners, but they had found nothing. Since then, no official records of the mansion had ever been documented. "There is more than just a spirit here," Father Gregory muttered. "This place might be a gateway." The priests and I gathered in the grand hall to perform the first cleansing rituals. Hymns were sung, and holy water was sprinkled throughout the rooms. But as the ritual progressed, Emily suddenly let out a terrified scream. She collapsed to the floor, writhing as if something was restraining her. Jonathan rushed to her in panic, but I held back. Emily's voice changed deeper, almost inhuman, as if something else was speaking through her. "Leave this place. This land does not belong to you." That night, the mansion was quieter than ever before, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind that came before a storm. As the priests prepared for the exorcism, I stayed by Emily's side. She wouldn't be sleeping that night, neither would I. At exactly 3 a.m., the air in the room turned ice cold. The windows burst open on their own, and the wind lashed against the curtains. Emily bolted upright in bed, screaming. From just outside the door, I heard a whisper. Only 2 words. "It's coming." At that moment, I realized the worst entity here had yet to fully reveal itself. But now it was near. At exactly 3 a.m., I was in Emily's room. The windows had flung open on their own, and the curtains swayed in the air. The cold was so intense that my breath fogged up in front of me. Emily lay on the bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. At that moment, I heard the whisper again, just outside the door. "It's coming." Father Gregory and the other priests were right beside me. I clutched the bottle of holy water tightly in my hand. Suddenly, Emily's body went rigid, and her torso began to bend forward unnaturally. This isn't normal," I whispered to Father Gregory, but he didn't seem to hear me. He had already begun reciting Latin prayers. A gust of wind suddenly swept through the room. As Emily's hair lifted into the air, a thick black smoke began rising from her body. As the smoke spread into the corners of the room, strange symbols began carving themselves into the walls. Each one bore the mark of an ancient, dark force. As Emily convulsed, a deep, echoing voice filled the room. "This place was mine, and it will always be mine." For a brief moment, a cold sweat ran down my spine. This entity hadn't just possessed Emily, it was using the entire mansion as a cage. One of the priests began ringing a small bell in his hand. The moment the sound echoed, Emily let out a blood-curdling scream, and every light in the mansion went out. In the pitch-black darkness, Father Gregory's voice rang out. "We must stay together. Do not separate." But then I heard the sound, a deep, heavy thud against the walls. Something or someone was moving inside the room. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and menacing. By the time dawn broke, we were all exhausted. Emily looked as if she had aged overnight, her eyes sunken, her voice reduced to a whisper. Father Gregory turned to me. "If we don't stop this, we will lose Emily." I knew what he meant. We had to perform a powerful ritual, and it was risky. We decided to descend into the mansion's basement. The air was thick, suffocating. Moldy books and small, weathered stone idols lay scattered across the floor. As we stepped further in, a different reality unfolded before our eyes. "There's something here," I said, placing my hand on an old stone chest. Father Gregory lifted the lid, revealing a torn, decayed priest's robe inside. The fabric was covered in strange symbols, stained with dark, brownish marks. Someone performed a ritual here, and they succeeded, Father Gregory whispered. Inside the chest, we also found ancient, yellowed parchments inscribed with Latin prayers, along with a crumbling seal stone. Each artifact confirmed what I had feared. This mansion wasn't just a house. It was part of something much older, much darker. That night, Emily remained completely silent. Only her slow, steady breathing could be heard. We covered the mansion in protective seals, recited prayers, and strengthened our barriers. But at exactly 3 a.m., a thunderous crash echoed from the attic, jolting the upright. A door had opened somewhere. At the same time, Emily's eyes turned completely white, and the room became ice cold. Something was speaking through her. "You are too late. It is here." In that instant, a terrifying laugh echoed throughout the mansion. Doors flew open on their own, and from the basement, an eerie melody began to rise, filling the entire house with its sinister presence. Father Gregory raised the cross in his hand and shouted, "We begin now." The final night had begun. Father Gregory gripped his cross tightly, his voice echoing through the mansion as he sprinkled holy water and recited Latin prayers. The priest's chants grew louder, filling every corner of the estate with the power of the exorcism. But Emily writhed on her bed, groaning in agony. Her eyes had turned completely white, and words she was not meant to speak slipped from her lips. "You cannot take me from here. I belong to him. My soul is his." That eerie melody from the basement still echoed throughout the house, and the walls trembled on their own. It was as if the mansion itself was alive, fighting back, trying to stop the ritual. One of the priests and I decided we had to go down to the basement. If we could find the source of this darkness, perhaps we could finally understand why this entity still clung to Emily. Father Gregory remained upstairs, leading the ritual. As we descended into the basement, an oppressive heaviness filled the air. Strange symbols were carved into the stone walls, some of them still glowing faintly. In the center of the room we found an old stone altar, stained with dried blood. This wasn't just a basement, it was a temple for rituals. Then, suddenly, whispers emerged from the dim shadows. The priest beside me froze, his eyes wide with fear. "They are watching us," he whispered, his voice trembling. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, and without warning, shadowy figures with no faces appeared before us. While the priests continued their prayers upstairs, the entities in the basement multiplied. They surrounded us, growling as if they resented our presence. "You will not leave." A deep voice boomed. A wave of ice-cold air washed over me, making my entire body shiver. Above us, the entire house trembled. Father Gregory had reached the most crucial part of the ritual. A suffocating pressure filled my chest, and then Emily's screams suddenly stopped. For a brief moment, the shadowy figures hesitated, as if something had changed. Then, at the center of the basement, a swirling abyss of pure darkness began to form. Upstairs, Father Gregory raised his cross high, his voice ringing through the mansion as he spoke the final words of the exorcism. The shadows wailed in agony, the walls shook violently, and the entity within the mansion let out a deafening, inhuman scream before retreating into the void. Emily gasped, her eyes slowly returning to normal. She was awake, but exhausted. Father Gregory collapsed to his knees, drained of all strength. By morning, the mansion felt different. The air was no longer thick with dread, and an eerie calm had settled over the house. But we all knew the darkness within its walls would never truly disappear. Emily and her family decided to leave the mansion for good. As for me, before setting off on my next journey, I stood in front of the house one last time, listening to the silence inside, and then I heard it, a faint whisper from the walls. "We will return." The end. Some stories are thought to be over, but are they ever truly over? Emily and her family are gone. The mansion is silent, but we know darkness never truly disappears. Has this really ended, or is it simply waiting? When the darkness returns, so will we. Until next time. But who knows what will be waiting for us?